Hi, I'm Paul Guppy, Vice President for the Washington Policy Center, and this is our regular weekly update about what is going on in our exciting state legislature down in Olympia and all the crazy ideas that they're working on, also important legislation that's going to affect everybody in our state. And the reason I throw out crazy ideas is we keep an update of how many bills have been introduced since January 9th, and that number is 1,475 bills have been introduced in our legislature so far this year, and we're only in the fourth week of the session. So that gives you an idea of the volume of legislation that's introduced, but only a few hundred of those bills will actually end up going to the governor's desk. And even of those, only a dozen or so will really have major impact on all of us. One of the primary ones, which I'll be doing in future updates, is what is happening with the next budget, two-year budget that the legislature is going to have to enact before they adjourn, which is scheduled for April 24th. But definitely the hard deadline is July 1st, which is the state's fiscal year. So if the government is not funded by July 1st, then we'll have a government shutdown. But it's pretty clear that the Democrats, who have solid majorities in the House and the Senate and control the governor's office, will almost certainly complete their budget work on time, even if there's a lot of debate and controversy until then. And as I say, we'll be revisiting that issue. In the meantime, I'll touch on an update on a non-legislative issue that we've been following very closely, been very engaged with, and that is the hearing that was held last week before the state Supreme Court on the capital gains income tax bill that the Democrats passed. And there are lots of ins and outs on this issue. Our expert, Jason Mercier, attended the hearing personally, and as did our president, Mike Gallagher, and the chairman of our board, Kevin Boucher. We're all there on the spot. And it was interesting to follow the hearing and notice that virtually all of the arguments that were made by Rob McKenna, who was challenging this law as unconstitutional, all the data, facts, research, even references to the IRS and to other states and as to how they handle taxes came from Washington Policy Center research. So we were very happy about that. The outcome was, we don't know yet. So the Supreme Court had a hearing, the justices asked some questions, and then a ruling will come in the next weeks or months. Unlike other judicial cases, however, this one is starting to hit the people of our state already, because the governor has instructed the Department of Revenue to go ahead and collect this tax beginning April 18th. So those who fall under the tax are going to have to pay, even though it's being adjudicated in court. We are wondering whether the justices are sensitive to that and whether they will issue a ruling before April so that we can have guidance. But in the past, they have taken months and months before they have given a ruling. To me, that's an odd way to adjudicate justice in a state, but the court operates under no deadlines at all. They set their own schedule. They could take 3 years to put out this ruling if they felt like it. But the practical effect is that we're going to have an answer much sooner. Jason has run through and posted on our website what are the possible outcomes. So there are 3 possible things that the court could do. Number one, they could do what the Democrats would like them to do, which is to rule that you do not own your income. In other words, that income is not property under the understanding of the Constitution, and therefore the legislature can tax it in any way that they like. That would overturn about 100 years of precedence from the state Supreme Court, which has always ruled that when you earn a dollar as income, you own that dollar, and that is part of your property. The Democrats would very much like to change that definition so that they could tax income. The next is that they could rule that this tax, again, the outcome that the Democrats want is that this is not an income tax, it's an excise tax. And their argument is that it's a tax on the transaction of selling capital gains or realizing capital gains. Again, Jason has gone to all other 49 states. He went to the IRS. He's even looked at foreign countries, and every authority virtually in the world understands that this kind of tax is a tax on income. It's not a tax on a transaction. As you can tell, that's kind of a technical discussion, and it's possible the court, maybe for political reasons, will weave its way into getting to the point where calling it an excise tax. And the third option is what we think is the obvious outcome. The plain reading of the Constitution clearly shows that this capital gains income tax that the legislature enacted in 2021 is clearly unconstitutional. We could amend our Constitution But that has been tried 10 times before, and the voters have voted it down every single time. Now, you can't fault the Democrats for persistence, because they have already introduced a constitutional amendment in the current session, which would do exactly that: repeal the protections for property and allow an income tax to be available. If that resolution moves through the legislature and passes, it could be put on the ballot for the voters to vote on either this year in 2023 or in the general election in 2024. You can imagine the politics of that. An income tax measure on the ballot during a presidential election cycle would really drive turnout in the state, and the Democrats are not sure whether they want that. So we will keep an eye on that proposal, see how it goes. In the meantime, we'll wait to see what the courts rule in the next several weeks. Next item is I presented research to the committee on a bill that just popped up recently, SB 5209 it is. I was tipped off by Senator Jeff Wilson, who's a member of the committee. And this bill would, for the first time ever, require mandatory voting in Washington state. This issue came out of nowhere, but the Democrats on the committee seem to feel very strongly that there should be a rule that it is illegal to not vote. They provide a waiver, you can make excuses, you can get out of it, there's no penalty. So they are making it the lightest kind of rule possible, because they don't want to get people stirred up, but the result is still the same. The bill contains language that says every ballot would say at the top, you are required by law to submit this ballot. And so we argued very strongly against that. The bill has 14 Democratic co-sponsors. It has no Republicans on it. And so we think this is an odd idea to come up, and we're sort of wondering why they are pushing mandatory registration and then mandatory voting. Washington Policy Center, as you would expect, took a very principled constitutional approach to this, and our analysis simply showed that if you have a right, that it's inherent in yourself, it doesn't come from the government, this is the basis of American law, and that therefore, if you have a right, what's included in that is the ability to not exercise that right. And the examples we gave is you have the right to speech, you also have the right to not speak, you have the right to bear arms, you have the right to not own a firearm, which obviously many people do. So every right includes that option to not exercise it. And we said the same thing about voting. You have a right to vote, which includes the right to not vote. So we will see what the Democrats do with this issue. If it doesn't get out of committee, we will assume that they are afraid to push it any farther, but we'll see what happens later on in February. Next is a very exciting development. A bill has just been introduced. It's a bipartisan bill, HB 1615, which would create education savings accounts in Washington state. If you go to other states, this is not a controversial idea. 32 states have some form of school choice. Arizona just enacted a universal school choice bill. They now have a Democrat governor who is going to go forward and implement this program. So again, this is a bipartisan idea. It's common in other places, and we're impressed that some Democrats and Republicans in our legislature have come together to have a hearing on this bill and possibly move it out of committee. We are hearing that one Democrat, at least on the committee, may vote in favor of it, which will be enough to move it to the House floor. So what does the bill do? It is narrowly targeted, which is what we would expect for a new idea that's getting started. It's primarily for special needs children and for low-income families that have been assigned to a failing public school, and there's a definition for that. So if you're being sent to a bad school because of your zip code, this bill would offer you an option out. What we like about the bill is that it's direct assistance to parents and that it's completely voluntary. So that is an element that public education needs. Parents are not able to choose options right now. We have some choices like charter schools, but this would offer a direct assistance to families. The dollars involved are $11,000 per year per eligible child, with $10,000 on top of that for every special needs child. So that would provide kids with the services that they need. Guess who's against this? The WEA union. We didn't even have to ask them. We knew that they were going to oppose it because they will do anything to maintain their monopoly within the public school system. The union collects about $47 million in dues every year, and this is their business model. Anything that allows parents to take their education dollars and their children and go someplace else, the union opposes it. And sure enough, they showed up at this hearing and testified against HB 1615. So we will see what the committee does after that. Next is we're encouraged that another bill, HB 1101, has been introduced, which would repeal the unpopular long-term care tax. Elizabeth Hovde on our staff is the most prominent independent expert on this issue. She has shown that this benefit would not help people. I mean, it's a payroll tax. You have to pay into a long-term care program as an entitlement, but whether you collect that money at the end of your working life is questionable. If you move out of state, you don't get anything. So she's pointing that out. People realize this. It's been sinking in over the last year or so, and almost 500,000 people have already opted out of it. The Democrats, this was so popular that the Democrats cut off the opt-out date. So now you can't opt out anymore. And on July 1st, this tax will kick in. It's 58 cents for every $100 earned with no cap. The lifetime benefit, however, if you ever get to that point, is only $36,500, which, as anyone familiar with long-term care, is, even if you got that benefit, it would only last 3 or 4 months. So we are promoting private coverage, which is affordable, more competitive, and it's a policy that you own. And we hope that the legislature will take a look at that. And then lastly, I've mentioned in the past, another good bill that we like, it's got bipartisan support, is a tax transparency website. Jason on our staff has testified in favor of it. It would allow you to simply find out what your tax bill really is in our state. And we hope that that moves forward too. Lastly, major topic for the legislature this year, pushed by the governor, pushed by majority Democrats, and Republicans have their ideas, and that is how to create more affordable housing in our state. As you would expect, the governor is proposing billions of dollars for what he calls, quote, social housing. And that's subsidies, government-run housing, public housing, the standard model of socialism, of where the government distributes a benefit to people who it decides are eligible. We oppose that because it traps people in a system where the government is your landlord, or you have no route to independence. As one of our analysts pointed out, appears that the government just wants a population of tenants, people who are renters, never being able to move on to ownership. So that's why we oppose that approach. What we do support is adjusting the 1990 Growth Management Act, which severely restricts where housing can be built. We take an empirical approach to public policy. If something has been in place for 30 years, there's plenty of data to show how it's working. And our research shows that these restrictions can add up to 24% to the cost of a home. And good news for the government, because all you have to do is pull back on regulations, taxes, permitting, zoning restrictions in certain areas, and allow more buildable land to be available, particularly in outlying areas where new housing can be built. Some people are concerned about zoning in preserving historic areas that are already built up. We understand that, so we are not for a free-for-all, but the Growth Management Act is so tight that there's literally a hard line in every county that says that you can't build in certain areas. We think the legislature should look at that. If the governor is claiming we need hundreds of thousands of new housing units, why isn't he allowing the competitive market to provide those? So we're going to keep promoting that message. Lastly, our next On the Go event, where we get more update and discussion with our analysts about what's going on in Washington State, will be live at noon online through our website on February 7th. And we hope that you have a chance that you will join us. And that's our update, and I'll be back for more in the future. Thanks.